Hello and welcome to Fantasy View, a podcast for reviews of fantasy novels. I'm Jason Hubbard. It's time now for the third installment in the Sword of Shannara trilogy by Terry Brooks, which is a bit of a misnomer since the actual Sword of Shannara is only featured in the first book and not for very long. The first installment was, of course, the Sword of Shannara, and the second was the Elfstones of Shannara. The third one, which definitely has the most unique title, is the Wishsong of Shannara. Like the last entry, the Elfstones of Shannara, Wishsong has only a few returning characters, with most of the cast being brand new. But unlike Elfstones, Wishsong feels more like a true sequel, making a story by building on the foundation laid by previous entries. It takes place about 20 years after the events of Elfstones. Our two lead characters are the twin children of Will Ohmsford, named Bryn and Jer. I like the name Bryn, but not Jer. I don't know, it just sounds perverse to me, just because it rhymes with the word hair. I know that's not a rational reason for not liking the name, but I can't help it. We learn right away that Bryn and Jer have a special power. Whenever they sing, they make magic happen. As the book says, if you wish for it, you sing for it. Hence the name Wishsong. They have this magic because their father Will, the lead character of the previous book, had used the powers of the Elfstones, and that power led down to his children. So how about that? The Ohmsford twins are like the X-Men. They're mutants, not because they're hideously transfigured or something, but because they have magic powers they genetically inherited. Both siblings have this magic, but there is an important difference between the two. Bryn's magic can affect living things, either by reshaping their physical forms or by changing their behavior. But Jer can only make illusions, so he can frighten enemies, but never directly harm them with his magic. Many third installments in a series tend to take a little bit of the history of the first installment and change or expand it, and Wishsong is no different. Back in the Sword of Shannara, we learned that the villainous Warlock Lord wanted to conquer the Four Lands as soon as he discovered how to gain magic powers. And the reader can only assume that he wanted this simply because he was an asshole. Which would have worked fine, but Brooks now says that it was the power of a book that corrupted the Warlock Lord's mind, turning him evil. This ancient book, called the Ildatch, holds the key to certain magic powers, and now, many years after the Warlock Lord's demise, some group of assholes got their hands on it and now want to conquer the land, because that's what assholes do. Alanon, the last of the Druids, and our Gandalf stand-in for the story, once again, pays a visit to Bryn and Jer, giving them near heart attacks in the process, and tells them the story of the Ildatch. The power of the book, which is inherently evil, has turned the assholes who hold it into dark walkers, which are basically shady figures in dark robes. By the way, I know this is yet another parallel to The Lord of the Rings. And no, this doesn't bother me, because villains in dark robes are kinda cool, while villains in white robes are just douchebags. Wink wink. Alanon says he wants to recruit the talents of Bryn Ohmsford because her magic can break into enemy territory and get them to the Ildatch so they can destroy it. Jer, however, can just stay home because his magic can only create illusions. And as everyone knows, the power of illusions is essentially useless when going deep into enemy territory. Yes, you should feel sorry for Jer, because he quickly becomes the author's punching bag, going through tremendous physical abuse when villains come knocking on his door after Alanon and Bryn leave him. He's captured by a group of gnomes, which are short, yellow-skinned creatures that decidedly do not resemble little versions of Santa Claus in the world of Shannara. They're looking for Alanon, so they interrogate Jer as to Alanon's whereabouts. When Jer gets defensive and uses his Wishsong, the gnome chief beats him senseless till he's knocked out. Jer's abuse in this story doesn't get worse than this, but it goes to show that a young man in a Shannara book who has magic and little else had better watch the hell out, or at least pack plenty of bandages before going on an epic journey. So, about that journey. Is this a journey worth taking? Yes, it is, mostly because it checks off most of the boxes within the list of essential things that a fantasy adventure book needs. There's a dangerous journey, here taken by two groups of heroes, a varied and interesting cast of characters, a threat that definitely needs to be addressed, and plenty of action, both stylized and realistic. Still, this book would have been better if it had more interesting lead heroes. Back in my Elfstones review, I gushed over how good the lead heroes were, but in this story, our leads kind of fall flat. I'm not saying that they're entirely one-dimensional, but it seems as if the author was trying his best to play it safe with his characters, keeping their emotions in check and making them react to things more than do things on their own. The twins are a step up from the bland Shea from the first book, but not by much. Bryn is perhaps the more interesting Ohmsford twin, since Al-Anon teaches her that her magic is much more dangerous to herself and others than she initially thought. Plus, she tricks a great spirit into telling her some vital information, which is kind of cool. She mostly spends the book worrying about her situation, which is understandable, but beyond that, there's not much to her personality. Now, there are a few instances where she could say some interesting things, give her opinion on matters, but she instead just goes with the flow and keeps her opinions to herself, which I don't think makes for a very interesting character. Her brother Jer, I believe, is the more missed opportunity. It says in the beginning of the book that he inherited his mother's fire, which I assume means he's especially passionate about the things he likes and dislikes, and he can be quick to anger. But throughout the story, that fire seems to be missing. There are times when he gets angry, of course, but those are moments when anyone would be angry, such as getting the crap beat out of him. But for the most part, he's very level-headed, even more so than his sister, actually, who is said to be the more patient of the two. Jared could have been the source of some interesting drama. Instead, he's more of a talking head, and a hero figure who saves the world, just because the story just so happened to need one. Oh, but the worst character in this entire story has got to be Slanter. Slanter is a gnome. In fact, he's the one who captured Jer and brought him to the other gnomes in the first place. Slanter is at first a villain, for he sure sounds like a villain. But it turns out he's not like other gnomes, for he's not as superstitious. He had gone out and traveled through the Four Lands, learning about other cultures and their languages. He only rejoined the gnomes because the gnomes rose to power once again under the rule of the Dark Walkers. And he predicts that they're going to win their war against the dwarves, so he wants to be on the winning side. But he takes pity on Jer after capturing him, rubbing salve into his bare feet and loosening the ropes bounding Jer's hands. And when Jer gets the chance to escape, Slanter takes his side. So far so good, right? It seems like Slanter might be a very likable character, since he's someone who's escaped the culture of taboo that his people live under, and instead goes with his conscience. But he's someone who wants to be a survivor above anything else, and the author figures that when the future becomes uncertain, such a character turns into a whiny little brat. Seriously, once Slanter and Jer find refuge in a dwarven village, all Slanter does is complain and say that they are surely doomed once they set out again into gnome territory. And later, in a similar situation in a dwarven fortress, he does it again. It is truly a wonder no one cuts his head off to put an end to the noise. I simply have to give an example to show what I'm talking about. In the latter scenario, in the dwarven fortress, Jer wakes up in a bed because he got a little beat up and he nearly drowned. Slanter is in there with him because the dwarves don't entirely trust him because he's a gnome, the race of the enemy who's placing the fort under siege. Granted, the dwarves could have strung him up and hanged him as a warning to the enemy, or do even worse things. Instead, they stuck him in the room with the unconscious Jer, so things are more in the gnome's favor. Slanter apparently doesn't see things this way, since he's miffed about being held indoors. So, shortly after Jer wakes up, he groggily ascertains that Slanter is in the room with him. "Slanter, you're alive," he says. "Of course I'm alive! What does it look like?" Slanter says. Jer asks if any of the other travel companions made it past the gnome forces. "Slow down, will you?" Slanter says. "They're all fine, and they're all here, so stop with your worrying. The elf took a dart to the shoulder, but he'll live. Only one who's in danger at the moment is me. That's because I'm shut up in this room with you, dying of boredom. Now will you climb up out of that bed so we can get out of here?" Jer asks him a few more questions, such as about the siege and the gnome forces. Slanter says, "Haven't heard a word I said, have you? What's the problem? Ears not working or something?" He complains some more about being stuck in the room, and Jer says, perhaps just to placate him, that he could have woken Jer up earlier. Slanter's response, "How could I do that? How was I to know what was wrong with you? Could have been anything. Had to let you rest just to be sure. Couldn't be taking chances, could I? That black devil weapons master would have had me flayed alive." Jer then says, "Calm down, will you?" Slanter, "I'll calm down. Will you get yourself out of that bed and into your clothes? There's a guard on the other side of that door, keeping me shut in here. But with you awake, maybe we can talk him into letting the two of us out." And just what does Jer do about all this complaining and ranting? Take a guess. Go on, please. I'll wait. All right, did you guess? Okay, well, if you guess that Jer punches the gnome's lights out, you really should have known that was wrong because it was nothing more than your own personal fantasy. If you guess that Jer uses the Wishsong against Slanter, that's a better guess, but it's still wrong. Personally, if I were in Jer's place, I'd say something like, "I may not be much for sewing, but if I was, I'd sew that gaping hole you call a mouth shut as tightly as I could." But alas, Jer only gets up and puts his clothes on, thinking to himself that Slanter was more like his old self again, that voluble fellow he had been on the night he had first captured Jer. The fellow that Jer had come to like, so the book says. Granted, Slanter doesn't complain throughout the whole story, but when he does, holy shit, he goes on a tirade that seems to go on way too long. If I had to hear someone like that in real life, I'd be prone to covering my ears, and eventually I'll tell the person that, yes, I get it. Your world sucks right now, and I've just made it suck a little bit more, whether I meant to or not. So, enough already. Hell, I wonder if the author himself knew someone like that, and he couldn't help but channel that person through Slanter, so that the rest of the world could see just how irritating one can be. Okay, so Slanter may not be the worst character I've ever read about, but I'm telling you, if this story was adapted into a movie, holy crap. You thought Jar Jar Binks was bad, because he was dumb and annoying. You thought Dobby the house elf was bad because he had an irritating high-pitched voice. At least they're not whiny little piss-pots like Slanter. I suppose seeing the gnome become a new bullseye for gift makers would be pretty cool. But at what cost? And finally, there's one more character I want to talk about, and he is simply called the King of the Silver River. An odd name, sure. I mean, how could one become the king of a river? Well, he's not really a king. He's a magical being that's said to be millions of years old. He appears only before people whom he wants to see him, and he's generally known to hang around this Silver River. I have a slight problem with this character because he is the embodiment of what I actually dislike about many fantasy stories. namely godlike characters who give our heroes their source of motivation. Many times, this source is knowledge of the future, and the King of the Silver River is an especially blatant provider of such a source. He tells Jer that Al-Anon may have chosen his sister over him to journey with, but if Jer does nothing, then all is lost, and blah blah blah. The king also gives Jer some magical artifacts, because those are always awesome, and thus Jer has a reason to go on his own journey. The King of the Silver River, in being a kind of prophet, is just one example in the fantasy genre of a storytelling device that comes across as kind of cheap. I'd go more into this, but I'd like to do that in a future review if you don't mind, so sit tight. And by the way, this isn't the first time the King of the Silver River has appeared. He was also in the other installments of the trilogy. I just kind of forgot to mention him. So yes, this means I have been negligent in my reviewing duties. Thus I will climb to the top of the nearest bell tower, strip naked, and flog myself repeatedly, until my loyal listeners, all 10 of you, have decided that I have punished myself enough. Oh, the lengths I go to for quality. Does this story have any awesome characters? Well, I guess the weapons master that Slanter mentioned in the previous quote is kind of awesome. His name is Garrett Jax, and he's basically just some guy who is really good at fighting with weapons. His introduction involves him kicking a whole boatload of ass, which is always fun, after which he joins Jer on his journey. He's reluctant, of course, since he doesn't believe that the fight against the gnomes and dark walkers is something he should get involved in. Ultimately, he does join because he's promised something, which gives Jer a ragtag band of misfits, all of whom have different reasons for wanting to dispose of the dark walkers and the Book of Evil, the Ildach. And so that's the Wishsong of Shannara. If you ever read the first 2 installments in the trilogy, then you might as well read this final one. Just don't expect anything mind-blowing. It's not a grand conclusion to a trilogy, just a necessary one that helps wrap things up and yet leaves some potential for future stories. And oh, are there stories. Terry Brooks had been busy since Wishsong came out, returning to the land of Shannara several times, as well as writing the Kingdom of Landover series and the Night of the Word series. Maybe someday when I'm old and gray I'll review them, although right now there are other stories I like to pursue. Going back to Wishsong, I don't recommend it being your first Shannara book. If you're interested, then at least check out Elfstones first, since that'll give you a strong connection to the characters in Wishsong. Then perhaps you'll be disappointed with Wishsong, since it's the same kind of adventure as done in Elfstones. That's my impression, at least, judging from some of the reviews on Amazon. Readers are disappointed that Wishsong follows a similar formula and tone as Sword and Elfstones. I guess that's the danger of reading a series made up of segmented stories, rather than one continuous story. This is Jason Hubbard signing off. Thank you for listening, and please, keep reading.